I didn't cancel the wedding when I found out my fiancé was sleeping with my best friend. That would have been too easy. Instead, I let her walk down the aisle in her $15,000 custom dress in front of 200 guests, fully believing she had secured a lifetime of my money. Then, I handed her a legally binding financial nightmare that would ruin her life, completely destroyed my ex-best friend's career, and walked out of the church leaving them with over $100,000 in non-refundable debt. If you want to know how a software engineer systematically dismantles two betrayals with cold, hard numbers, you need to hear how this started. It all began exactly 18 months ago. I was 29, working as a senior forensic data analyst for a major tech firm. My job was to find anomalies in massive datasets, track missing money, and uncover corporate fraud. Because of my career, I was incredibly comfortable financially. I owned my house, my car was paid off, and my investment portfolio was solid. But I wasn't flashy. I drove a practical sedan, wore simple clothes, and spent my weekends either hiking or hanging out with my closest circle. The center of that circle was two people, Jessica, my fiancé, and Mark, my best friend since middle school. Jessica and I had been together for 4 years. She was a kindergarten teacher, always presenting herself as this sweet, wholesome, incredibly caring person. She volunteered at animal shelters, baked cupcakes for her students, and had my entire family completely charmed. Everyone thought she was an angel. Everyone told me how lucky I was. I believed them. I loved her more than anything, and I wanted to give her the world. Then there was Mark. Mark was the opposite of me. While I was analyzing spreadsheets, he was playing guitar in dive bars trying to get his band off the ground. He was charismatic, loud, and constantly broke. Over the last decade, I had bailed him out more times than I could count. I paid his rent when he was short, bought his groceries when he was struggling, and even financed his band's first demo tape. I didn't mind. He was like a brother to me, and I thought that's just what brothers do. I was the reliable one. He was the wild one. It was a dynamic that worked for us since we were kids. When I proposed to Jessica, I didn't hold back. I bought a flawless 2-carat diamond ring, rented a private rooftop garden, and hired a string quartet. Mark was there, of course, hiding in the bushes to take photos. When she said yes, she cried. My parents cried. And Mark hugged me so hard he almost cracked my ribs, telling me how happy he was for his two favorite people. The very next day, the wedding planning began, and Jessica's wholesome facade slowly started to shift into something entirely different. She didn't want a simple, elegant wedding. She wanted a massive, Instagram-perfect spectacle. She immediately booked the most expensive historic manor in the state for the venue, which required a $25,000 non-refundable deposit just to secure the date. The catering had to be a 5-course plated meal. The photographer had to be flown in from out of state. The dress was a custom designer gown that cost more than my first car. Whenever I gently brought up the ballooning budget, she would get teary-eyed and say, "But this is my dream day. You said you wanted to give me my dream. Do you not think I'm worth it?" I loved her, so I swallowed my anxiety, pulled money out of my investments, and paid for it all. Every single deposit, every single invoice was entirely in my name, paid from my accounts. Jessica's salary as a teacher barely covered her own car payments, so the unspoken agreement was that I was funding the entire $100,000 event. During this entire stressful planning process, Mark was surprisingly absent. He told me his band had finally booked a series of regular gigs out of town, and he was constantly on the road. I was happy for him, assuming he was finally getting his life together. When he was around, he was usually at our house, hanging out with Jessica while I was stuck at the office working overtime to pay for the rapidly expanding wedding budget. I never thought twice about it. They were my two favorite people. Of course, they should be friends. The turning point happened exactly 3 weeks before the wedding. I had been working 70-hour weeks to close a major project so I could take a full month off for our honeymoon, a luxury resort in the Maldives that I had already paid $18,000 for. I was exhausted, stressed, and running on pure caffeine. One Tuesday night, my project finished early. I decided to surprise Jessica by coming home with her favorite takeout and a bottle of expensive wine to celebrate. I pulled into the driveway, expecting to see her car. It was there, but so was another vehicle. It was Mark's beat-up Honda Civic. I smiled, genuinely happy that he was visiting. I grabbed the food, unlocked the front door quietly to surprise them, and walked into the hallway. The house was dead silent. I put the bags down in the kitchen, assuming they were in the backyard. But as I walked past our master bedroom, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. And then I heard a sound that completely stopped my heart, froze the blood in my veins, and destroyed my entire life in a fraction of a second. I stood frozen outside my own bedroom door. The sounds coming from inside weren't ambiguous. It was the distinct, undeniable sound of my fiancé and the man I called my brother. For a few seconds, my brain completely short-circuited. My first instinct was violence. I wanted to kick the door off its hinges, scream, and tear the room apart. I felt a rush of adrenaline so violent my hands started shaking uncontrollably. But then, the forensic data analyst in me, the part of my brain that spends 80 hours a week detaching emotion from facts, took over. If I confronted them now, it would be a messy, screaming, emotional disaster. Jessica would cry and manipulate the situation. Mark would play the victim. They would gaslight me, delete their messages, and try to spin the narrative. And worse, I would be stuck trying to cancel $100,000 worth of wedding contracts with no solid proof, losing everything in cancellation fees while they walked away clean. I didn't want a scene. I wanted absolute nuclear destruction. I silently backed away from the door, careful not to let the floorboards creak. I grabbed my car keys, picked up the takeout food so they wouldn't know I had been there, and slipped out the front door, locking it quietly behind me. I got into my car, drove 3 blocks away to a dark parking lot, and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't cry. I was entirely numb. I opened my laptop. Because I had set up the entire smart home network, I had administrative access to everything. Our router, the security cameras we used for the dog, the digital locks on the doors. I had never snooped on Jessica before. I never had a reason to. But now, all bets were off. I logged into the router's history and pulled the MAC addresses of the connected devices. Mark's phone had been connecting to my home Wi-Fi almost every single day between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. for the last 6 months. While I was at the office grinding to pay for her dream wedding, he was in my bed. The out-of-town gigs were a complete lie, but I needed more than just Wi-Fi logs. I needed intent. I remembered that Jessica had an old iPad synced to her iCloud account that she kept in her home office drawer. I waited in my car for 2 agonizing hours until my security app notified me that Mark's car had finally left the driveway. 10 minutes later, I pulled back in, walked inside, and acted completely normal. I kissed Jessica on the cheek, handed her the cold takeout, and told her I had been stuck in traffic. She smiled her perfect, sweet smile and asked me how my day was. Not a single trace of guilt in her eyes. It was terrifying how easily she could lie. Later that night, while she was taking a bath, I went into the office, found the iPad, and bypassed the old passcode. The messages between her and Mark were all there. It wasn't just a physical affair, it was an entire parallel life. They were mocking me. Mark called me his personal ATM, joking about how easy it was to get me to pay for his lifestyle. But the worst part, the part that truly flipped a switch in my head, was a conversation from 3 days prior. Jessica had texted him. Once we are married, his name goes on the new house deed, but my name gets added to his investment accounts. We just have to play the game for a little longer. After the honeymoon, I'll start pushing for a joint account. Mark replied, "You're a genius, babe. Just keep him busy with the wedding stress." She wasn't just cheating on me, she was orchestrating a massive financial coup. She wanted to lock me into a legal marriage, drain my premarital assets by mingling them in joint accounts, and then likely divorce me to take half of everything I had spent my life building. The $100,000 wedding wasn't a celebration of our love. It was a smokescreen for the biggest heist of my life. I sat in the dark office, staring at the glowing screen. The betrayal was so profound, it almost felt fictional. They thought I was just a naive, hard-working bank account they could exploit. They forgot what I actually do for a living. I dismantle fraudsters, I track every single penny, and I build inescapable digital traps. They wanted to play a financial game with a forensic data analyst. I took high-resolution photos of every single message, uploaded them to a secure, encrypted cloud server, and wiped the iPad exactly how I found it. The wedding was in exactly 20 days. I had less than 3 weeks to figure out how to completely ruin both of their lives without them suspecting a thing. I wasn't just going to cancel the wedding, I was going to let them pay for it. The next morning, I woke up, looked the woman who was trying to steal my life in the eyes, and smiled. It was the hardest performance I have ever had to give. I kissed her forehead, told her I loved her, and went to work. For the next 20 days, I had to be the perfect, loving, oblivious fiancé. Every time Mark came over to drink my beer and slap my shoulder, I had to laugh at his jokes instead of breaking his jaw. I channeled every ounce of my professional training. In my job, when I find a corporate embezzler, I don't warn them. I quietly gather the evidence, secure the funds, and wait for the authorities to drop the hammer. I treated Jessica and Mark exactly like an embezzlement case. First, I had to legally untangle myself from the $100,000 wedding. I had already paid about $30,000 in non-refundable deposits, which was a sunk cost. But the remaining $70,000 for the venue, catering, and flowers was due exactly 3 days before the ceremony. The contracts were currently in my name. That had to change. I called all the major vendors, the venue coordinator, the head caterer, and the florist. I told them a very convincing, slightly embarrassed lie. I said my fiancé was very traditional, and her parents had suddenly decided they wanted the honor of having the final contracts in the bride's family name for the official records. The vendors didn't care whose name was on the paper as long as they got paid. They sent over amended contracts. That evening, I sat Jessica down at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork. I had buried the amended vendor contracts underneath applications for our new joint bank accounts and the travel insurance for our Maldives honeymoon. I poured her a glass of wine, rubbed her shoulders, and played the stressed-out groom. "Hey, babe," I said, "my accountant told me we need your signature on the final liability waivers for the venue and the caterer. Just standard insurance stuff." "Oh, and here are the joint account forms you wanted." Her eyes lit up at the mention of the joint accounts. She was so blinded by her own greed, so eager to get her hands on my assets, that she didn't even read the vendor documents. She just signed right on the dotted line, legally transferring the liability for the remaining $70,000 of the wedding directly onto herself. Next, I had to secure my house. The house was solely in my name, bought years before I met her. But because she had been living there, she had tenant rights. I couldn't just throw her out on the street without a legal eviction process, which takes months. So I used her own manipulation against her. I told her that my lawyer required a standard prenuptial agreement just to protect my company's stock options, but that everything else, the house, the cash, the cars, would become shared marital property the moment we said "I do." I drafted a document that looked incredibly complex, filled with legal jargon, but buried on page 4 was a clause stating she voluntarily surrendered all residency rights to my property in the event the wedding was canceled. Again, she signed it without reading, too focused on the fake joint account documents I had dangled in front of her. With my assets secured and the financial time bomb handed over to Jessica, I turned my attention to Mark, my best friend. The man who drank my liquor while sleeping with my fiancé in my bed. Mark had recently asked me for a $15,000 loan to buy new audio equipment for his band's supposed upcoming tour. He claimed it was the opportunity of a lifetime. I knew the tour was fake. He just wanted my money to float his lifestyle while he hooked up with Jessica. I told him I would absolutely give him the money, but because it was such a large sum right before the wedding, my bank required a notarized personal loan agreement to avoid a massive tax penalty. Mark, being financially illiterate, eagerly agreed. We went to a notary, and he signed a legally binding promissory note to repay the $15,000 in full within 30 days of the wedding, with severe default penalties including asset seizure. I handed him a cashier's check. Everything was in place. My money was safe, my house was secured, and the two of them were legally bound to massive debts they had no idea were about to detonate. The days counted down. The dress was fitted. The guests started arriving in town. The rehearsal dinner was flawless. I stood at the head of the table, raising a glass of champagne, and looked at Jessica holding my hand, and Mark sitting right next to me. I gave a toast about loyalty, trust, and the people who truly matter in life. They both smiled and drank to it, thinking they had won. They had no idea that tomorrow morning at the altar, I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. The morning of the wedding was a logistical masterpiece. We had 150 guests arriving at a historic $15,000 a day luxury manor. The caterers were setting up a 5-course gourmet meal. The florist had delivered massive custom centerpieces, and Jessica was upstairs in the bridal suite with her bridesmaids, drinking mimosas and getting her hair done. She was wearing a custom-designed $15,000 gown. She thought she was hours away from legally accessing half my net worth. I arrived early, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, and walked into the groom's suite. Mark was already there, adjusting his tie, holding 2 glasses of expensive scotch I had bought. He handed me one, smiled his charismatic smile, and said, "You nervous, man? Today's the big day. You're a lucky guy." I took the glass, looked him dead in the eyes, and clinked it against his. I didn't drink. I had spent the last 2 hours finalizing my exit strategy. My car was packed with everything important I owned: my hard drives, my essential documents, a week's worth of clothes, and a one-way ticket to a remote cabin I had rented under a fake company name in the mountains. I had already transferred the vast majority of my liquid assets into newly created, highly secured offshore trusts that Jessica didn't even know existed, effectively making me legally broke on paper. If she tried to sue me for breach of contract or emotional distress, she would find absolutely nothing to take. I had completely firewalled my life from her, but before I disappeared, I had to deliver the payload. I walked over to my suit jacket hanging on the door. Inside the breast pocket were 3 thick manila envelopes. I pulled the first one out. I turned to Mark, who was admiring himself in the mirror, entirely oblivious. "Hey, Mark," I said quietly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I have a gift for you. I know you've been a great best man. I wanted to give you this before the ceremony starts." Mark turned around, a surprised smile on his face. He expected a watch or an expensive bottle of wine. I handed him the envelope. He opened it, expecting a thank you card. Inside were high-resolution, glossy printouts of the iCloud messages between him and Jessica, explicitly detailing their affair, their plans to steal my money, and him mocking me as an ATM. He froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His eyes darted from the photos to me, completely terrified. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The charismatic, loud guy was instantly silenced. I handed him a second document. "That," I said coldly, pointing to the paper, "is the legally notarized $15,000 promissory note you signed last week. I'm calling in the debt immediately. You have exactly 30 days to repay me in full, with interest, or my lawyer will legally seize your car, freeze your bank accounts, and garnish any income your band ever makes. You don't have $15,000. So, I guess I own you now." Mark stood there, completely paralyzed, holding the evidence of his betrayal and his own financial ruin. "If you say a single word before I leave this building," I added, "I will send copies of those photos to your entire family, your bandmates, and everyone you've ever known. Enjoy the wedding!" I turned around and walked out of the room, leaving my former best friend hyperventilating against a wall. I didn't run. I walked calmly down the grand staircase toward the main hall where the guests were starting to take their seats. My parents were there, talking to Jessica's family. Everyone was dressed beautifully, anticipating a romantic, tear-jerking ceremony. I walked straight past them, nodding politely and headed toward the bridal suite. I knocked exactly 3 times on the heavy oak door. One of her bridesmaids answered, a huge smile on her face, but she stopped when she saw my completely dead expression. "I need to speak to Jessica. Alone," I commanded. The tone of my voice made the bridesmaids instantly uncomfortable. They quickly filed out of the room, leaving me alone with the woman who was trying to ruin my life. Jessica turned around from the mirror. She looked stunning in the $15,000 dress I paid for. She had a radiant, perfectly practiced smile, ready to play the blushing bride. "Hey, baby, it's bad luck to see me before the ceremony," she giggled, walking toward me. She reached out to adjust my lapel. I stepped back, letting her hands fall to her sides. Her smile faltered slightly. "What's wrong? You look so serious." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the second manila envelope. I didn't say a word. I just handed it to her. She took it, confused, and slowly opened the flap. I watched her pull out the thick stack of printed iCloud messages. I watched her eyes widen and her perfectly manicured hands start to violently shake as she realized what she was holding. It was her entire parallel life, her 6-month affair with Mark, and her explicit plans to drain my bank accounts, printed in perfect, undeniable color. The sweet, innocent kindergarten teacher facade shattered instantly. She dropped the papers onto the floor like they were on fire, gasping for air, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. Her perfect day was over, and my revenge had barely begun. Jessica dropped the papers. Alex, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." The classic, pathetic defense of a cornered liar trying to buy time. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any anger or sadness. "It's a 6-month affair, a massive breach of trust, and a documented conspiracy to commit financial fraud against me." She started crying, real tears this time, ruining her professional, expensive makeup. She fell to her knees in her massive, custom-designed gown, desperately trying to grab my hands. "Please, it was a mistake. He meant nothing to me. I was just stressed about the wedding. I love you, Alex. I swear I love you." I pulled my hands away like she was venomous. "You love my bank accounts, Jessica. You love the lifestyle I provided. But here's the reality of your situation." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the third and final envelope. I opened it and let the documents flutter onto the floor right next to the photos of her affair. "Remember those venue and catering liability waivers you signed 3 days ago? The ones you thought were just a formality so your parents could have the honor of their name on the event?" I watched her tear-filled eyes dart down to the papers. "Those were legally binding transfer of liability contracts. I am officially, legally removed from this event. You, however, are now the sole liable party for the remaining $70,000 balance due by the end of business today." She stopped crying instantly. Her mouth hung open. She made $40,000 a year as a kindergarten teacher. $70,000 in immediate, non-refundable debt was a financial death sentence. You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "I already did," I replied coldly. "And that prenup you eagerly signed because you were so distracted by the fake joint bank account forms? Read page 4. You voluntarily surrendered all tenancy and residency rights to my home in the event of a wedding cancellation. My digital locks were reset at midnight. My lawyer has already filed the paperwork. You are officially evicted. You have exactly 48 hours to arrange for a moving company to collect your boxed belongings from my garage, or they go to the city dump." She looked like she was going to be physically sick. The fairy tale was gone, instantly replaced by a crushing mountain of debt and immediate homelessness. "Alex, please," she begged, her voice barely a squeak. "My family is downstairs. Everyone is waiting. What am I supposed to tell them?" I adjusted my cuffs, looking down at her one last time. "You don't have to tell them anything. I'll handle it." I turned my back on her, sobbing on the floor, and walked out of the bridal suite. I walked down the grand, sweeping staircase and entered the main hall. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, massive floral arrangements, and 150 guests dressed to the nines. The string quartet was playing a beautiful classical piece. My parents were in the front row, smiling proudly. Her parents were across the aisle, radiating excitement. I walked straight up the center aisle. I didn't stop at the altar. I walked right up to the microphone the officiant was preparing to use for the vows. I tapped it twice. The sharp thud echoed through the massive hall. The string quartet slowly stopped playing. 150 faces turned to look at me in absolute expectant silence. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the room. "The venue is beautiful, the food smells incredible, and I know many of you traveled a long way to be here. Unfortunately, there isn't going to be a wedding today." A collective, confused gasp rippled through the crowd. My mother half stood up from her chair, her face pale. I didn't blink. Last night, I discovered undeniable, documented proof that my fiancée, Jessica, has been carrying on a 6-month affair with my best man, Mark. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt suffocating. Jessica's mother let out a sharp cry of shock, covering her mouth. Furthermore, they had a written plan to use this marriage to systematically drain my premarital assets and investment accounts. I looked directly at Jessica's parents, who looked like they had just been hit by a truck. "Your daughter is currently upstairs in the bridal suite. Mark is currently having a severe panic attack in the groom's room. I highly suggest you go speak with them. Oh, and for the record, the remaining $70,000 bill for this reception is legally under Jessica's name, effective 3 days ago. Please enjoy the open bar." "I have a flight to catch." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud electronic squeal. I stepped off the podium and walked back down the aisle. Absolute chaos erupted behind me. People were shouting. Her father was sprinting toward the stairs, and my parents were staring at me in shock. I gave my dad a quick nod. He knew me well enough to know I had handled it. And I walked out the heavy oak doors of the manor into the bright morning sun. I got into my car, turned off my personal phone, and drove away from the historic manor. I didn't feel heartbroken. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt the pure, weightless relief of a man who had just dismantled a bomb with 1 second left on the timer. I drove straight to the airport, bypassed my decoy mountain cabin plan, and boarded my first-class flight to the Maldives. I had paid $18,000 for that luxury honeymoon suite, and I absolutely refused to let it go to waste. For the next 2 weeks, I drank expensive cocktails on a private beach, read books, and used my encrypted laptop to monitor the absolute nuclear fallout I had left behind. The explosion was spectacular. By Monday morning, the venue, the caterer, and the florist all attempted to process the final payments for the $70,000 balance. The contracts were legally in Jessica's name, linked to her modest checking account. Naturally, the charges bounced immediately. The vendors did not care about her tears, her ruined dress, or the dramatic altar breakup. They were businesses, and they wanted their money. By Wednesday, Jessica was officially served with 3 separate breach of contract lawsuits. She sent me over 100 frantic emails and voicemails to my burner business number. They shifted from angry, demanding I pay my bills, to desperate, begging me to save her from total financial ruin. My lawyer had set up an automated response. Please direct all legal and financial inquiries to this law firm. Direct contact with the client will be considered harassment and reported to the police. Her housing situation was even worse. She had assumed my threat about the eviction was just an angry bluff. On the night of the canceled wedding, she tried to return to my house, likely planning to squat, refuse to leave, and force a drawn-out, months-long legal eviction process to torture me. But when she arrived, the digital deadbolts were unresponsive. True to my word, while she was sipping mimosas and getting her hair done that morning, I had hired a professional, bonded packing crew. Every single item she owned, her clothes, her shoes, her endless amounts of skincare products, had been meticulously boxed, inventoried, and placed in the detached garage. A temporary keypad code was given to her lawyer. She had to rent a U-Haul the day after her non-wedding in the pouring rain and move all her boxes back into her childhood bedroom at her parents' house. At 28 years old, her perfect kindergarten teacher image was shattered, and she was publicly humiliated. But I couldn't forget about Mark. My ex-best friend's downfall was equally poetic. Because I had dropped the truth bomb in front of 150 people, including our entire mutual friend group and his bandmates, he couldn't spin the story. He couldn't play the victim or claim we just grew apart. His bandmates, who knew I had funded their early recording sessions and bought half their equipment, were absolutely disgusted. They kicked him out of the band less than 24 hours later, publicly denouncing him on their social media pages. He was suddenly a pariah in our local music scene. Nobody wanted to book or play with a guy who sleeps with his best friend's fiancée and tries to steal his life savings. And then, the 30-day clock on his $15,000 notarized loan ran out. He didn't have the money. He didn't even have a fraction of it. He tried to send me a pathetic, multi-page email blaming Jessica, claiming she had seduced and manipulated his vulnerable artistic soul, and begging for a 5-year payment plan. I didn't even open the email. My lawyer forwarded it to my spam folder. On day 31, my legal team filed a motion for default judgment. Because the promissory note was ironclad, perfectly drafted, and notarized, the judge granted it immediately. We placed a legal lien on his beat-up Honda Civic, froze his checking account, and initiated a wage garnishment on his part-time bartending job. Every time he poured a beer for a customer, a percentage of his tips went directly back into my investment portfolio. They thought they were playing a game with a naive, generous guy who would just blindly fund their lives forever. They completely forgot what I do for a living. My entire career is built on tracking liabilities, enforcing contracts, and ruthlessly penalizing fraud. They wanted to steal my future, but all they got was a masterclass in legally binding destruction. It has been exactly 18 months since I dropped the microphone and walked out of that historic manor, leaving my cheating fiancé and my backstabbing best friend to face the financial apocalypse I designed for them. The dust has finally settled, and the final accounting of their betrayal is officially closed. Jessica tried to fight the $70,000 in vendor contracts. She hired a cheap lawyer who attempted to argue that she signed the transfer of liability documents under emotional duress. But the judge took one look at the timeline. She had signed the catering and venue waivers 3 full days before the wedding was canceled, in the comfort of my kitchen while drinking a glass of wine. There was no duress. There was just her own blinding greed. Because she only made $40,000 a year as a teacher, the compounding interest and legal fees from the 3 separate vendor lawsuits completely crushed her. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Jessica was forced to formally file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Her credit score was absolutely decimated. She lost her car because she could no longer secure the refinancing she needed, and she is legally barred from taking out any significant loans or mortgages for the next 7 to 10 years. The sweet, wholesome image she had meticulously crafted in our town was completely destroyed by the local gossip. She actually had to resign from her school district and move 2 towns over just to escape the whispers of the parents. She went from being days away from accessing a millionaire's portfolio to living in a cramped studio apartment, entirely dependent on a debit card because no bank will issue her a line of credit. As for Mark, the reality of adult consequences hit him like a freight train. Without my money floating his rent and his bar tabs, his artistic lifestyle collapsed instantly. Because of the court-ordered wage garnishment for the $15,000 promissory note he signed, a massive chunk of his bartending paychecks is automatically routed into my accounts before he even sees a dime. My lawyer successfully executed the lien on his beat-up Honda Civic, which was seized and sold at auction to cover a portion of the debt. The guy who used to mock me as his personal ATM now takes a city bus to a minimum wage job, slowly paying back the man whose life he tried to ruin. His music career is entirely dead. And me? I didn't let the betrayal turn me into a bitter, isolated person. I took the pain, completely detached it from my emotions, and threw all of my energy into my career. The massive corporate fraud project I had been working 70-hour weeks to finish before the wedding was a massive success. It saved the tech conglomerate over $4 million in projected losses. Because of that, and because I no longer had the exhausting dead weight of a toxic relationship holding me back, I was promoted to the director of data analytics ahead of schedule. My investment portfolio has doubled. I sold the house that Jessica tried to steal and bought a stunning modern loft right in the heart of the city. I travel whenever I want, I sleep 8 hours a night, and I surround myself only with people who have proven their loyalty. If there is one lesson to take away from this entire ordeal, it is this: never assume that the quiet, reliable person in your life is weak. Never mistake generosity for stupidity, and above all else, if you are going to orchestrate a massive financial conspiracy to steal someone's life savings, make absolutely sure that person isn't a forensic data analyst. We don't scream, we don't throw things, and we don't get mad. We just look at the numbers, find the vulnerability, and legally erase you from the equation. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed watching a cheater get exactly what they deserve through cold, hard, malicious compliance, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Unsaid Stories. We have new, insane tales of nuclear revenge dropping all the time. Let me know in the comments below, what is the most brutal way you've ever seen a cheater get caught? See you in the next video.